Internet of Unintended Consequences with my friend Tom.
And my friend Deb.
Welcome back. We are continuing our conversation about digital government. We've talked about some rights and responsibilities, and right now we want to delve into one in particular, data and privacy. I'm sure you guys are saying there is no privacy in the world, and we actually talked about this way in the beginning about that it's not in our Constitution. We don't have a constitutional right to privacy. We have different laws that try to protect types of information that we have. And you were talking about how important information is today.
It is important because, I have a background in the news business, and I was saying earlier that news is reported now so much in real time that outside of real time, there's not a lot of news that's being reported, it seems. And so what I think people are really looking for to make important decisions about their lives and their decisions is information. And as you were saying, information is power.
Yeah, it could be very powerful. We're told that all the time about how important information is. But we also know that sometimes with power, you can get drunk on power, right? It can go the other way towards corruption and stuff. And I think that's why when people look at data, when they look at information that's kept by the government, they also have some requirements, right? And Newsom, in his book, Citizenville, actually talks about these government open data initiatives. And he says, it's great that they want to give us data, but we have to make sure it's relevant data, right? And he gives 4 factors as to this data. So he says it should be findable. In other words, accessible. We should be able to get to it fairly easy. It should be standardized. Now, this is a really interesting concept because like the internet and the World Wide Web really took off once we had the protocols, right? Once everybody can speak the same language. And I think that's what Newsom is getting to.
Exactly, that it should be standardized so that on whatever device you're using, you can access it and then you can understand it.
Yeah, so now here's the third one.
Okay.
Trustworthy.
That's a big one.
That's a big one, right? Is the data that we get from our government, can we trust it? And there is an argument that goes around, well, lots of times the data that the government collects was actually paid for by us, the taxpayers.
True.
Right? We paid the people in government to collect that data. We paid for the equipment. We paid for it to be stored. Can we trust then that that data is credible, that it's accurate, that it is what we need it to be? I mean, think about the census for a minute, right? They do the census every 10 years. You fill out a form or somebody comes to your door now and they're, starting to use tablets and stuff like that. But by the time that they've got all that data together, it might be years later.
Well, I think we have to trust it. If we can't trust it, then that's a whole nother conversation. So I think that we have to, until shown otherwise, believe that the data not only is trustworthy, but that it was collected in a trustworthy manner.
Well, you're more optimistic than I am, but then I'm the attorney, so I'm the cynical one, right? But the last thing that Newsom talks about is that it should have a narrative to it. In other words, people should understand the meaning of the data and be able to use it and relate to it. Because if it's just numbers, then what does it mean? If it doesn't mean anything to me, if it doesn't relate to my life, why am I even going to bother with it?
Exactly, and that's that's really a big thing now in the media, are big data reporters, people who can take that information, analyze it, and make meaning and sense out of all of that big data.
Yeah, they always talk about we learn through stories, right? Because we can remember stories. It's very hard to just remember lists of statistics.
Exactly.
Right? But if you put that narrative, if you put the story to it, then it means something and then we can actually use, right? Now, there are some arguments, though, that people in government had said as to why not to release certain information, that there should be certain information that is protected. One of them is always the issue of national security.
Sure, of course. national security, and I think personnel information is generally protected when you're making personnel decisions, and even in corporations, that information, when a company releases information to the news media, a lot of times it won't release personal information about people and decisions.
Yeah, and one, because of safety, right? Just to protect the person, that they don't become targeted in that way. But I think the other thing is that some of the data doesn't get released because people are afraid what citizens will do with it. That it might come back to haunt them.
Well, that's not a very good reason, I don't think.
No, well then if you didn't do anything bad, you have nothing to hide, right? I think that's how that argument sort of circles around.
Sure, and for people to find the data trustworthy, I think that there needs to be a transparency to that data, to how it was collected and why it was collected.
Yeah, sort of like that verification trail.
Exactly.
Right, of that data and how it's used there. And I think, it's interesting because we have this question that comes up. You and I had talked about WikiLeaks and the idea of that information being released. And, there's this question that says, did the public's right to know outweigh the potential harm of releasing the information? Right, so we're on a balance of that, and who should make that call?
You know who I think makes that call? I think it's the public. My opinion. I do. I think watching the public. I think that we found this out in the newspaper business. The public is very smart, as a rule, and the American public in particular, because we live in such a great country with such a great government, and I think the public opinion tends to make the right decision in the end.
Oh, you think so? But once the information is out there, yes. But once the information is out there, you can't take it back.
That's true.
Right. So even if the public says, well, they never should have released that information, it's out there already.
It is.
So it's one of those things you can't take back. Now, there is an argument that says, if government and politicians know this information is going to be released publicly, then they're not going to do anything bad. The counter argument to that is if they know that this stuff is going to be released publicly, they're going to be even more discreet and more dark and do it really under the table. And then we're actually going to have more dishonesty.
Well, that's an interesting...
optimistic, Tom.
But that's why we have the Fourth Estate. Because they shine the flashlight under the table and find out what's being passed around under there.
Okay, can you just explain to them what the Fourth Estate is?
That would be our news media.
Point for Tom. Well, what do you think about this conversation about government protecting our information, government protecting data? We had an incident where the government personnel office was actually hacked, and there was a lot of information about government employees, their information being lost, and what was the responsibility of government, and should government be held to a higher standard to safeguard data?
Oh, absolutely, because they have so much data from our phone records, social security information, bank account information, and as technology continues to grow and to improve, and we hear more and more about cybersecurity and cyber warfare. I'm actually working on a cyber info conference in Europe next year.
Cool.
It's the biggest conference in Europe, and I'm working on that.
Can I hide in your suitcase?
I wish I was going. It's going to be in London next June, but it's the biggest cyber info security conference in London every year, and the fact that companies come from all over the world shows the importance on protecting information.
Yeah, and I think, when you talk about data, you have to talk about the cybersecurity, because the data's in the cloud, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be in its protected server. So data, privacy, cybersecurity, it all goes together.
It does.
As we're there. But join the conversation, hashtag IoUC, dig, D-I-G, gov, G-O-V. You can check us out on our website, www.tiouc.com, and of course on Facebook, facebook.com/TIOUC. So this is the Internet of Unintended Consequences. My friend Tom.
And my friend Deb.
Have a great day. Bye.